Okay, so for domain and range, we're going to learn interval notation. It can only be used for continuous data, but it's a more compact way of describing the notation. So the first chart here compares set builder and interval notation. So we're going to look for the properties. What do you think makes the interval notation be as it is? So you can see here, this was yesterday's work, the set builder notation. This is x is greater than or equal to -2, less than or equal to 5. So notice how the same two numbers are in the interval. Here, same two numbers are in the interval. But this has an equal sign in both, and this has square brackets. This does not have an equal sign in both, and it has round brackets. So what you might notice from that then is perhaps that means that if it doesn't have the equal sign, we use round brackets, and if it does have the equal sign, we use square brackets. So let's take a look at the next one. No equal sign, round brackets. Equal sign, square brackets. Okay, so that's the case. So note that in this case, when the domain expressed in interval notation, so with this particular domain, what we want you to note there is that it looks like an ordered pair. Because ordered pairs, when you plot a point, you go 2, 7, right? In round brackets. So it looks like it is. So it's really important that you put either D or R, whatever it is, out front with a colon, so that we know, okay, that's the domain. It's not an ordered pair. So it looks exactly like the notation used for coordinates of a point. Therefore, it is important to be aware of the context regarding the notation, and whether the notation refers to a domain or a point. So what's really important is to put that D in front. Here, what we often use D as well for domain. We often use an equal sign for set builder. You can use a colon, but often an equal sign, and colon for interval notation. Take a look. What happens if it's all real numbers? So here, all real numbers. Now, what do we do with interval notation? Well, all real numbers means it goes to positive infinity as well as negative infinity with no breaks in between. So there's your negative infinity to positive infinity. Notice how they have round brackets. That's because we don't know what infinity is. It's kind of like a really weird thing. It's a huge number, but we can't stop at just what infinity is. So we're not including it. So that's why there's no square brackets. So anytime you have infinity or negative infinity, it's round brackets. So that's for all real numbers. If we just have one inequality sign, think about what that means. It means the biggest number is 2. So the biggest number goes on the right, always in this interval notation, always in order, never the other way around. And so the biggest number is 2 on the right. It doesn't have an equal sign, so it's round brackets. And because it's only one boundary, it's going to go to negative infinity. Okay. So then here, this does have an equal sign. So the right-hand number is going to be 2, but with a square bracket. And it's everything less than or equal to 2, so it goes all the way to negative infinity. Okay. And here, sometimes there'll be 2 parts, right? So our domain in the last one is y less than or equal to 2 or y greater than or equal to 5. So we have to have 2 intervals. So here we're going from negative infinity to 2, square bracket, because it's got the equal sign. Then y is greater than or equal to 5, means 5 is your smaller number, going to positive infinity. And this symbol is the union symbol that you learned back in middle school, junior high. Okay, it means it includes both sets of those numbers. Here, just a reminder, infinity also, that infinity has no upper bound or lower bound. Since negative infinity has no lower bound and infinity has no upper, we use round. Really, it's parentheses. Those, I call them brackets, but it's really parentheses whenever we have infinity or negative infinity. This U-shaped symbol is the union or the combination of two sets of intervals, or 3 sets or 4 sets. Whereas in Set Builder, we might use or we might actually just use a comma. In interval, we have to use that symbol. Okay, so let's practice. Whichever notation is used in a question to describe the domain and range, either Set Builder or interval, you must be consistent and use the same notation for that question. So you can't do domain in Set Builder and range in interval unless we ask you to. Otherwise, if we don't ask you for a certain notation, you decide. Sometimes though, we'll ask you a certain type. Can you put that down, please? Okay, so here you had some of these types of questions in that activity, and you certainly had them yesterday. So you're going from the left, the smallest x value is -3, and notice that the arrows are pointing to the right. They're going to the right. So here, yesterday's work would be x greater than or equal to -3 with all the other stuff to it. But we're doing this in Set Builder. So domain colon, and then smallest value is -3, biggest is infinity. And infinity is like a sideways 8. And so does it include -3? It sure does. And infinity, we always use a round bracket. So that's your domain in interval notation. The range, that arrow is going to the right, up and to the right, or down and to the right. And there's no gaps in between. It's continuous all the way. So if you're going up and down, it's all real numbers, right? So in our Set Builder, we would just have y element of the reals. But in interval, that means we're going from -infinity to +infinity. Okay. Now this one, take a look. It's got arrows on both ends. Anytime it's a line, we call it an oblique line, so like a diagonal line, then it's going to be all real numbers for both. It's the easiest domain and range you could ever do. Okay, so it'd be all real numbers for both, which means this is going to be -infinity to +infinity, and range is going to be the same. Okay, I think we did this one yesterday or something similar. So we've got A and W. What makes it a little bit nicer for interval notation is you don't have to use the variables. Okay, the only letters you have are D for domain, R for range. So here that's nice. And take a look at your smallest x value and your biggest x value. So you're going from 10 to 45. Those are endpoints. There's no open circle, so we assume that it includes it. So we're going from 10 to 45, and we would use square brackets. Then vertically, the lowest value is at 30, and the highest value is up here at 60. Don't just look at this endpoint. It goes higher than that. So between 30 and 60, and again, includes those values. So use square brackets. Okay. Now in D, that's a line as well, but it's not an oblique line. It's a horizontal line. Horizontal, think of the horizon. is this way, okay, parallel to the ground. So it's horizontal. So it's going left and right, no gaps. So it's all real numbers for domain, which means negative infinity to positive infinity. But the range, there's only one value. No matter what point you're at, it's 2. So in this case, for the range value, we would just use, we couldn't actually use, well, I guess I've never seen that before. I wouldn't use that. I would just actually, for range, just write 2 in set builder notation. Well, because that tells you it's just the number 2. If you were to use interval, then I guess what would be acceptable?
For any students who have not yet had their photo taken for the yearbook or would like to have a photo retake, please go to the cafeteria now. So any students who have not yet had their photo retake done,
I'm just going to look
at your photo taken for the yearbook, please go to the cafeteria now. This is your last call.
Is that you?
Thank you.
Just to see what Miss Labardi has put for that. Yeah, so it would be 2 to 2 if it was just give me an interval. Just want to look here. So I would never use interval notation for that one. Oops. Yeah, 2 to 2. Rarely will you see it like that, okay? It's kind of, now that's kind of more work for that interval notation, right? But
so what's the problem with writing it? R22?
2 to 2, yeah. Okay. And then there's some practice there, okay? Not a whole lot. So if you take a look at your timeline, it says